Can a joke destroy a marriage? I thought I was being funny, teasing, light-hearted, the way I always was at work. But when my husband found out what everyone at the office already knew, it stopped being a joke. To him, it was betrayal with a smile. I'm Alara Quinn, 31, and I've always been the funny one. At least that's what people said. I could turn anything into a joke, smooth over tension with a laugh, make awkward moments disappear. It worked at work, it worked with friends, and I thought it worked in marriage too. Jonas used to smile when I teased him, but somewhere along the way, his smiles got smaller. I blamed his quietness for making me louder. It started at the office. Harmless banter, I told myself. My boss, Ryan, had that easy charm everyone fell for. We joked during meetings, traded sarcastic texts, and people started calling him my work husband. I didn't mind. It made me feel interesting, like I wasn't just another tired woman juggling spreadsheets and laundry. When co-workers laughed, I laughed too, saying things like, Ryan and I should just share a hotel room next trip, save the company some money. It was a line that always got a reaction, so I kept using it. Jonas hated it. He told me once, gently, that it made him uncomfortable. I said he was being dramatic, that he knew I was joking. He said it didn't sound like a joke to everyone else. I told him maybe he needed to stop worrying about what people thought. That ended the conversation, or at least, that's what I thought. At home, things stayed polite, but thinner somehow. Jonas started staying late at work, and I pretended not to notice. I told myself he just needed space. In truth, I liked the freedom. The quiet gave me room to perform for someone else's laughter. Then one evening, at an after-hours office dinner, someone filmed one of my jokes. I didn't know until the next morning, when my phone buzzed with notifications and messages. The clip was short, me raising my glass, laughing, saying, "Guess I'll be bunking with Ryan again next week. Poor Jonas can survive without me." People online found it hilarious. They shared it everywhere. But when I got home that night, Jonas wasn't laughing. His phone was on the table, the video paused on my smiling face. He looked up at me and said quietly, "Do you ever realize what you sound like when you're not joking?" That was the last normal sentence he said to me. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It all began at the office, bright lights, endless chatter, and that strange sense of belonging that comes from being part of a team that laughs too loudly at its own jokes. I liked being the center of it. I wasn't the smartest or the most ambitious, but I was the one who could make everyone laugh. Ryan, my boss, appreciated that. He said once, "You make long days tolerable, Alara." I told him I should get that in writing. It became our rhythm. Sarcasm traded across meetings, quick smiles, the kind of banter that looked innocent until someone watched too closely. Jonas always said work changed me. He wasn't wrong, but I didn't see it that way then. To me, it was just personality. What harm was there in being funny? When I'd come home and tell stories about Ryan, he'd listen quietly, nodding but not smiling. Once, he asked, "Do you talk about me at work like that?" I laughed and said, "Of course not. You're not that entertaining." He didn't laugh. It became my routine. Tease Ryan during meetings, roll my eyes at his serious boss voice, make the interns giggle. Once during a trip planning call, he joked about the company budget being tight, and I said, "Guess we'll just have to share a room again." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, pleased with how quickly I could control a room. Ryan chuckled, shook his head and said, "Careful, my wife might start believing you." I said, "Tell her I'm not that lucky." That line got the biggest laugh of all. I told Jonas about it that night, thinking he'd find it funny too. Instead, he frowned. "You really said that?" he asked. I shrugged. It was a joke. He said, "You keep saying that, but I don't think everyone hears it that way." I told him people at work understood my humor, that he was reading too much into it. He said quietly, "They're not the ones married to you." I brushed it off, poured myself wine, and said he was too sensitive. A week later, Ryan started using the joke himself. "You booked the hotel yet, Alara? 1 room or 2, he'd say in front of others, always with that grin. I played along, pretending to roll my eyes but secretly liking the attention. It made me feel clever, like I could handle any comment. People started teasing me at lunch. "You and Ryan, the power duo." I pretended it didn't bother me, even though sometimes it did, but I'd built my whole image on being unfazed, so I leaned into it. At home, Jonas grew quieter. He'd ask about my trips, and I'd give short answers. I didn't want to talk about the teasing or the way I'd started dressing better for work. I told myself he wouldn't understand. One night, while we were folding laundry, he said softly, "I don't like how people talk about you at your job." I rolled my eyes. "You don't even know them." He said, "I know you." I snapped back, "Then trust me." He didn't reply. That silence irritated me more than words ever could. The night everything started unraveling was during an after-work happy hour. Ryan and I were sitting with a few co-workers, and someone asked about our next conference trip. Ryan smirked and said, "Don't worry, we'll keep costs low, 1 room, as usual." I could have shut it down, laughed politely, changed the subject. Instead, I raised my glass and said, "Hey, at least he's clean and quiet. My husband should take notes." Everyone roared with laughter. I felt powerful again, adored. Someone was filming. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop. Tina texted, "You're trending, girl." I opened the link. There I was, mid-laugh, making my now famous line about Ryan and Jonas. The caption read, "When your office banter goes too far." I froze. The comments were a mix of amusement and disgust. "She's married," one read. "Imagine if her husband saw this," said another. When I got home that evening, Jonas was waiting at the kitchen table. The video was paused on his phone, the sound muted. He looked at me, calm, too calm, and said, "So this is what you do when I'm not around?" I tried to laugh, said, "Oh, come on. It's just the internet making something out of nothing." He didn't smile. "You said it yourself," he said quietly. "I heard your voice." I told him he was overreacting, that everyone knew it was a joke. He said, "Everyone except me." His tone wasn't angry, just tired. That scared me more than shouting would have. For the next few days, we barely spoke. I went to work pretending nothing was wrong. Ryan avoided eye contact. I overheard 2 co-workers whispering near the printer. "She's lucky her husband hasn't left yet." I pretended not to hear. When I got home that evening, Jonas's things were still there, but the drawers were half empty. He didn't leave a note, not even a message. Just space, wide and wordless, where his presence used to be. I stood in the middle of the living room, replaying my own laughter in my head, realizing for the first time how sharp it had sounded. The kind of sound that cuts instead of warms. I told myself he just needed time. He'd always forgiven me before, but something about the silence in that apartment told me this time was different. He wasn't waiting to cool off. He was learning how to live without me. For 2 days, I convinced myself he'd come back. I checked my phone every hour, rehearsed apologies I never sent, cleaned the apartment like a nervous habit. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom, his slippers still beside the bed. Proof, I told myself, that this wasn't real. But on the 3rd morning, I woke to a message instead of him. It said only, "I need space. Please don't call." I stared at it until the words blurred. Space. That polite, impossible word people use when they already know they're done. I replied anyway. "Can we talk, please?" He didn't answer. At work, everything felt colder. People had stopped laughing when I entered the room. The jokes that once made me popular now made everyone nervous. Tina pulled me aside after lunch. "You okay?" she asked carefully. I said I was fine. She hesitated, then said, Look, that video really embarrassed Ryan. He got a call from HR. I blinked. Are you serious? She nodded. He told them you were just joking, but maybe stop making those comments for a while. That night, I texted Jonas again, saying the whole thing had gotten blown out of proportion, that even my boss knew it was just a misunderstanding. He didn't reply. A few days later, I came home from work and found a neat stack of folded clothes missing from his side of the dresser. In their place, an envelope. My hand shook as I opened it. It wasn't a love letter or an explanation, just a short note in his handwriting. You turned us into a punchline, Ilara. I can't live inside a joke. I sank onto the bed, reading it over and over. I wanted to be angry, to tell myself he was being dramatic, but all I felt was small. When I told Tina, she said, "He'll calm down. Men hate feeling humiliated." I said, "He wasn't humiliated. He just doesn't get humor." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. "Ilara," she said quietly, "you said those things in front of everyone. People at work talk. If it were me, I'd be hurt too." I laughed it off, but it sounded hollow. Jonas's mother, Mara, called me that weekend. Her voice was tight, polite. "He's here," she said. "He doesn't want to talk yet." I said, "Please tell him I didn't do anything wrong." She paused, then said, "Maybe that's the problem. You don't think you did." Then she hung up. I spent that night replaying every time Jonas had tried to warn me. Every quiet moment I'd brushed off. He'd said once, "You think laughter means safety." I hadn't understood then. I did now. By Monday, people at work treated me differently. Ryan barely spoke to me, except to keep things strictly professional. I caught him whispering with HR, his tone low and serious. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, "It's fine, but maybe lay low for a bit. People love drama." I smiled, pretending I wasn't the drama he meant. That evening, I stopped by Mara's house unannounced. She opened the door, surprised but not welcoming. "He's out," she said. I asked if I could wait. She sighed but let me in. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner, everything neat and still. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at a photo of Jonas as a boy. After a few minutes, she said, "Do you even know what you did to him?" I said, "I didn't cheat, if that's what you're thinking." She looked at me, her voice calm but sharp. Sometimes betrayal doesn't look like cheating. Sometimes it looks like mockery. I said I didn't mean for it to hurt him, that it was just a joke. She shook her head. "You humiliated him in front of strangers, and you laughed about it. Do you know what it's like for a man like him to walk into work and see people smirking? You took something private, respect, and traded it for attention." I had no answer. When Jonas came home later that evening, he didn't even look at me. I stood up, ready to speak, but he said quietly, "Don't. Please." His voice was tired, flat. I asked if he was really ending it over a few words. He said, "It's not the words. It's that you never cared who they hurt." I followed him as he walked to the hallway. "So what? You're just leaving?" I said. He stopped, hand on the door frame, and said, "I'm already gone." Then he walked into the next room, leaving me standing there, with my apology still forming and dying on my tongue. I drove home alone, gripping the wheel too tightly, feeling the weight of the silence between us. For the first time, the apartment felt unfamiliar. His absence rearranged everything. The bed looked bigger, the air colder. That night, I recorded a voice message, something desperate and small. "I miss you," I said. "Please don't throw everything away over a misunderstanding." I deleted it before sending. When I went to work the next morning, people avoided my eyes. Ryan barely nodded. The jokes were gone, replaced with that heavy kind of quiet that follows embarrassment. For years, I'd built my identity around being the woman who could make anyone laugh. Now, no one even smiled when I entered a room. It was late that night when I saw the email from a law office in my inbox. My hands trembled as I opened it. The subject line read, "Preliminary Notice of Marital Separation." The message was short, official, stripped of emotion. At the bottom, a note in his handwriting scanned on to the final page. "You always said words don't matter. Now they do." I stared at the screen until the room blurred around me. For once, I couldn't think of a single thing to say. I didn't tell anyone about the email for 2 days. I just kept going to work, pretending everything was normal while the words marital separation played on a loop in my head. I told myself he was bluffing, that this was just his way of getting my attention, punishing me for a bad joke. But deep down, I knew Jonas didn't bluff. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. When he said something, he meant it. By the 3rd day, even pretending became impossible. People at the office had seen the clip again after it resurfaced on a corporate meme page. My name was blurred out, but everyone knew. I could feel the whispers following me through the hallways. Ryan tried to act normal, cracking little jokes to make me comfortable, but I noticed how quickly he stopped whenever someone else walked in. That was when I realized he wasn't going to take the fall for any of it. During lunch, Tina sat beside me, lowering her voice. "People are saying you're being written up," she said. I laughed automatically, though it came out flat. "For what? Having a sense of humor?" She gave me a long look. "For embarrassing the company, for crossing a line." I rolled my eyes, saying, "It's ridiculous. Everyone jokes like that." She replied quietly, "Not everyone gets caught doing it." Then she stood up and left. That night, I couldn't sit still. I scrolled through my phone, reading and rereading old messages from Jonas. Texts about groceries, schedules, tiny things that once felt so boring. Now they felt like proof of a life I'd treated carelessly. I typed out another message. "Can we talk, please? I'll stop everything. I'll fix it." I waited an hour. No response. I tried calling. It went straight to voicemail. The next day, a corporate email went out about professional boundaries in workplace communication. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. Ryan avoided me completely now. In the break room, someone muttered something about sleeping your way to the top, and I nearly dropped my coffee. I wanted to shout that nothing had happened, that it was just words, but I'd learned people didn't care about truth once they had a story to tell. After work, I stopped by Mara's house again. She opened the door halfway, her expression guarded. "He's not here," she said. I asked if he'd gotten my messages. She said, "He reads them, that's all." I said, "Can you just tell him I'm sorry?" Her eyes softened slightly, but her tone stayed cool. "He doesn't need apologies, Alara. He needs respect. You can't joke your way back to that." I drove home with the radio off, gripping the wheel so hard my hands hurt. When I walked into the apartment, it felt emptier than before. I poured a drink and sat on the couch, staring at the dim reflection of myself in the window. I used to love my laugh. It made people look at me. Now, even the sound of it in my head made me feel sick. Later that evening, I heard a knock at the door. For one wild moment, I thought it was Jonas, but when I opened it, it was Ryan. He looked nervous, glancing down the hallway. "Can I come in for a minute?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He sat on the edge of the sofa, clasping his hands. "Listen," he said, "this thing's gotten out of control. HR's watching both of us." I told them it was all harmless, but he trailed off. I said, "But what?" He sighed. "They think we have an inappropriate dynamic. Maybe lay low for a bit. Stop the jokes, maybe take some time off." I felt my chest tighten. "So you're throwing me under the bus now?" I asked. He said quickly, "No, I'm protecting the company." That was worse somehow, knowing I wasn't even worth defending as a person, just a liability to be managed. After he left, I sat in the dark, realizing I'd built everything, my reputation, my marriage, my confidence, on laughter that didn't belong to me anymore. I'd used it like armor, and now it had turned into a weapon against me. The following morning, I received a formal letter by courier. It was from Jonas's lawyer, calm, professional, devastating. Attached was a proposed settlement, notes about assets, and a brief explanation that he was exercising his right to independent residence. The words looked cold on paper, but I could hear his voice behind them, steady and unshakable. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't begged, he was just gone. I called Mara again, unable to stop myself. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Please, just tell him I love him." There was silence on the line. Then she said, "He knows. That's what makes it harder." That night I went through every drawer in the apartment, collecting the little pieces of him that were still left. His favorite mug, a sweater, the book he never finished. I lined them up on the counter, like proof that I hadn't imagined our life. Then I realized what I was really doing. Holding awake for a marriage that had already died. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake until morning, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. It never came. The sun rose quietly, lighting the room in soft, accusing gold. I thought about all the things I'd said to make people laugh, the casual cruelty disguised as wit, the way I'd dismissed every warning. For the first time, I understood what Jonas had meant when he said words can cheat too. You don't have to touch someone to betray them. You just have to make them feel small in front of others. I turned over and buried my face in the pillow, wishing I could unsay everything. But words, once they've made an audience laugh, never really disappear. A week after the letter arrived, the apartment looked like a stranger's place. I stopped turning on the TV, stopped cooking, stopped pretending to be okay. Each night I sat in the dark, waiting for Jonas to call, knowing he wouldn't. The quiet became unbearable, a kind of punishment I'd never believed could exist. Every corner of the house reminded me of him, his jacket still hanging by the door, his handwriting on the calendar, his cologne faint in the closet. I told myself I should throw his things out, but touching them felt like deleting proof that we had ever been real. On Friday, I finally forced myself to go out. I met Tina at a cafe near the office, trying to act normal. She looked at me carefully, the way you look at someone who's already broken something they can't fix. "You don't look great," she said. I laughed. "Thanks, I'm doing my best." She stirred her coffee and said, "They've started saying HR might move you to another department. Too much tension around the situation." I said, "I didn't even do anything wrong." She looked up sharply. "Alara, you do realize people think you did?" I opened my mouth to argue, but she kept going. "You joked about sharing a room with your boss. You called your husband boring in front of a crowd. You laughed while he got humiliated. You may not have cheated, but you made it look like you did. That's enough for most people." I stared at my cup, unable to meet her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to get that far," I said quietly. She sighed. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Then she stood and said she had to get back to work. When she left, I sat there alone, surrounded by the noise of other people's laughter. For the first time, it didn't comfort me. It sounded sharp, cruel, familiar. That evening, I got a text from Mara. Just 2 words. "He's moving." My chest tightened. I called her immediately. She answered, sounding tired. "He found a small house near his office," she said. "He signed the lease today." I asked, "So that's it? He's really gone?" There was a long pause before she said, "He gave you every chance, Alara." After she hung up, I sat on the floor of our bedroom and stared at the wall. I wanted to blame someone, Ryan, social media, gossip. But deep down, I knew it had started with me. I'd made fun of the one person who never deserved it. Over the next few days, I started receiving official emails from Jonas's lawyer. Each message was written in the same neutral tone, listing practical details, shared accounts, bills, forwarding addresses. He was dividing our life with the same calm precision he used to fix everything else. No accusations, no emotion, just instructions. I tried replying once, writing, "Can we talk before we finalize anything?" The reply came a few hours later, short and polite. "There's nothing to discuss that hasn't already been said." At work, I avoided everyone. Ryan stopped speaking to me except through email. When I walked into meetings, conversations died. Even the ones who used to laugh with me now looked uncomfortable. The silence was worse than gossip. It made me invisible. One afternoon, I overheard two colleagues whispering near the printer. "She really thought she could joke her way out of it," one said. The other replied, "Her poor husband. I saw his post. He's already changing his status." My stomach dropped. I opened my phone under the table and searched his name. His profile had changed to single. I stared at it until the words blurred, my chest tightening until I could barely breathe. That night, I walked through the apartment touching everything we'd once shared. The couch where we'd fallen asleep watching movies. The table where he used to sketch while I talked too much. I kept waiting for some wave of forgiveness to crash over me. Something to make me pick up the phone and say what I'd refused to say before, that I was wrong, that I'd confused laughter for love and attention for validation. But every sentence I thought of sounded too late. The next morning, another envelope arrived, this time with his signature at the bottom of the separation forms. There was a small note attached in his handwriting. "This is the last thing I'll ask from you. Please sign so we can both move on." The calmness of it hurt worse than anger ever could. I sat at the table for hours, staring at the papers. The clock ticked loudly, marking time in slow, painful rhythm. When I finally picked up the pen, my hand shook so badly, the first line came out crooked. Signing my name felt like erasing a part of myself. That evening, I walked outside for the first time in days. The air was cold and sharp. The city lights blurred in the distance. And for a moment, I thought about how quiet my life had become. No laughter, no arguments, no Jonas. Just the echo of my own voice. Too loud in memory, too absent now. I came home and poured myself a drink, then another. The laughter in that video played in my head again, looping until it made me sick. The way I'd grinned, the way I'd looked so sure of myself, like nothing could ever go wrong. When I finally went to bed, I realized something terrifying. Jonas's silence wasn't punishment, it was freedom. He'd stepped out of the noise I'd created and found peace, and I was left exactly where my jokes had taken me. Alone, unheard, and surrounded by a silence I'd once thought I wanted. The mediation meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, and I arrived early, thinking maybe showing initiative would mean something. The office smelled like paper and coffee, sterile and neutral. Jonas was already there when I walked in, sitting perfectly straight with a calm I couldn't stand. He looked rested, lighter somehow. When our eyes met, he nodded politely, like you would at a stranger you vaguely recognized. His lawyer smiled stiffly and motioned for me to sit. Mine was still parking, so it was just us for a few minutes. I tried to fill the silence, saying, "You look good." He said, "Thank you," but nothing else. I wanted him to look angry. Anger meant there was still emotion, still something to hold on to. But he wasn't angry. He was gone in the way that people leave long before they physically walk out. When the lawyers arrived, they started talking through the agreements. Apartment lease to him, savings divided, visitation for Liam if we ever had one. Then I remembered we didn't, and the thought made my chest ache. I tried to keep up with the legal terms, but it all sounded like the background noise of someone dismantling my life. At one point, I interrupted, saying, "I don't understand why you're treating me like I cheated." Jonas didn't look at me when he said, "You didn't cheat. You just made me the joke everyone laughed at." I said quickly, "It wasn't serious. It was banter." He finally looked up, calm but firm. "You used to tell me that laughter kept us close, but you weren't laughing with me, Alara. You were laughing at me." The room went quiet. Even the lawyers seemed to hesitate. I opened my mouth but couldn't think of anything that didn't sound like another excuse. They went over more papers, signatures, dates. I signed where they told me to. Jonas signed without hesitation. When it was done, his lawyer thanked everyone for their professionalism, and my lawyer offered me a small, sympathetic nod. I barely heard her. I was staring at Jonas's pen still resting beside the last page, the one that officially ended us. When we stood, I said softly, "You can't just erase everything we had." He replied, "I'm not erasing it. I'm letting it stop hurting." We walked out into the hallway, and for a moment I thought about saying something funny, something light to make it less real, the way I always did when tension got too heavy. But the words wouldn't come. For once, humor wasn't a weapon I could use. I just stood there, watching him put on his coat. "Do you really think I deserve this?" I asked. He said, "You deserve someone who laughs the way you do. I just can't be him anymore." Then he left. I stayed in that hallway long after he was gone, staring at the closed door. My lawyer came back to collect her folder and gently touched my arm. "He's not cruel," she said quietly. "He's finished." That afternoon, I went home to the apartment that was still technically mine. For now. I walked room to room, feeling like a guest in my own life. His absence had a weight, like air too thick to breathe. On the kitchen counter was the note he'd once left me after our first big fight. "I hate arguing with you, but I still choose you every time." I stared at it until my eyes blurred, realizing he hadn't chosen me this time, and maybe he shouldn't have. That evening, I opened my laptop and started deleting things. Pictures, videos, posts. Every joke that mentioned him. Every clip that had made me feel clever. It felt like cutting pieces off myself, but it was the only thing I could still control. When I finished, the screen went dark. The reflection staring back at me didn't look funny, or confident, or even familiar. Just quiet. I whispered into the empty room, "You win." But the truth was, there was no winning. He'd simply walked away with his dignity intact, and I'd been left holding the echo of my own laughter, a sound that used to fill rooms and now only reminded me of everything I'd lost. The apartment was nearly empty by the time the final papers came through. I'd boxed up what was mine, though most of it felt meaningless now. Clothes I didn't want to wear. Mugs that belonged to a life I'd mocked out of existence. The silence was unbearable, but I kept the TV off. It felt wrong to fill the space with anything but what I'd done. A few days later, a courier delivered the last envelope. Inside was the official decree, printed and stamped, with a short handwritten note attached. No bitterness, no blame, just peace. That was all he wrote. I stared at the words until they blurred. Peace. I'd spent years making noise, filling every quiet space with laughter, sarcasm, anything to feel in control. Now he'd left me with peace, and it felt like punishment. That night, I tried calling him one last time. The call went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I say that hadn't already been said or ruined by excuses? I scrolled through old texts instead, searching for the last moment we'd been normal. A grocery list, a reminder about his dentist appointment, a heart emoji I'd sent without thinking. It hit me that real love wasn't the big gestures I'd always chased. It was those quiet, ordinary exchanges I'd treated as dull. Mara called later that week. Her tone was gentler than before, but still formal. "Jonas wanted me to check that you received the documents." I said I had. She hesitated, then said, "He's doing better. He's sleeping again. He's lighter." I didn't respond. I couldn't. After a pause, she added softly, "You may not believe it now, but he still wishes you well." Then she hung up. That night, I opened a bottle of wine and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint ring on the surface where his mug used to sit. I thought about all the times I'd made him small with my words, every laugh that came at his expense, every time I mistook his quiet for weakness. He'd never yelled, never fought back. He'd just waited until the noise drowned me out. Around midnight, I opened my work email out of habit. HR had finally sent the transfer notice. New department, new manager, effective immediately. I read it 3 times, feeling nothing. Even my job, the place where the laughter had started, was quietly closing the door behind me. I shut the laptop and walked through the apartment, touching the walls like they might answer back. Everything felt heavier now, not with grief, but with truth. The thing I'd thought was just humor had been cruelty disguised as charm. I'd always believed that as long as I didn't cheat, I was faithful. But I'd spent years performing for attention, handing out pieces of my respect to anyone who would clap. At some point, I noticed the envelope still lying on the counter. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and placed it inside a drawer. I didn't want to see it again, but I couldn't throw it away either. It wasn't anger I felt now, just a quiet understanding that this was exactly what I'd earned. When the sun began to rise, I opened the window. The air was cold and sharp, brushing against my face like a reminder to breathe. Somewhere out there, Jonas was probably making coffee, starting his day in a home without noise. I wondered if he ever thought of me, then decided it didn't matter. He deserved the peace he'd asked for. I looked around one last time, the living room, the couch, the faint dent where he used to sit. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was final. I whispered into it, half to him and half to myself. You were right. Words can cheat too. Then I turned off the lights, letting the quiet swallow me whole. The first real peace I'd ever had, and the one I'd earned by losing everything. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.